Hello and welcome to Code Tutorials. Today we'll be exploring the pricing slider widget, which is part of the Qi Addons for Elementor Premium Collection. With this widget, you can create interactive price lists. These price lists include a slider that users can adjust to get the right fit for the product or service they want. As we can see in this first example, by moving the slider, we can affect the price shown in the price list. And this can be useful for different types of products, services, or something like paid subscriptions where users can pick the duration, all kinds of things. Regardless of the purpose you put it to, this page shows us different examples of how the pricing slider widget can be used and styled. There's a wealth of options that will help you style both the slider and the price list itself. You can change anything from the text fonts and their sizes and colors to the shape of the slider, its color, what the button in the price list will look like, and much more. And in this video, we'll take a look at how you can do all that. As part of the tutorial, we'll be making copies of two different pricing slider examples from this page. So, let's get started. Head over to the backend. I already prepared the section where my first slider will go, and I added a background image to that section. That's done by clicking here to open the section editing option, and using the image field to upload whatever image you want. Then you can adjust its position. I set mine to center, choose whether it will repeat, mine won't, and decide what size you want. I'm using color for this. But that's just my setup, it's not why we're here. We're here for the pricing slider, so let me add it to the page. I'll click here to open the widget selection, and then search for pricing slider. There it is. Drag it over to the right. Okay, and this is what the widget looks like by default. We can see the different elements that make it up all have placeholder content. I'll be showing you how to change that, as well as the look of the slider as we go through the options. And the first of those options is the layout. It can be side, which we see on the right. It puts the slider next to the price list. Or it can be simple, which puts the slider above the rest of the content. This is the layout I'll be using for my first example. Also, I'll skip ahead a bit so I can reach the image field and remove the dummy image. I don't plan on using a visual on this pricing slider, given that I already have one for the section background. Alright, I'll go back up so we can tackle the options in order. After layout, we have unit name. It's a plain input field where you can replace the text that appears in the slider. I'm going to replace the default unit with module. And we have a unit name plural field, which I'm also going to fill in. There, we can see the text on the page has changed right away. Next, we have the unit range field, where we can set a number of units or modules or points that will be included in the slider range. I'll set 100 for this. The number you put here depends entirely on what you're selling and into what kind of units it can be broken down. And speaking of units, the most important thing is their price. So, in the price per unit field, you can set what they'll cost. Mine will be $20. This is all just for the tutorial. Also, I mentioned dollars, but that's just the default currency. There's an option to change it. We'll see that in a bit. Still, for the slider I'm making, I have 100 units for $20 each. Meaning, if anyone dragged this handle to the end of the slider, their total price would be $2,000. Okay. However, you can give discounts if you like. And to do this, you'd use the unit breakpoints field. This is where you can enter, breakpoints, which will visually group the units. If you set this, the slider will change to show the breakpoints, which will also make the slider easier to navigate for your customers. And if you choose to add a discount, the breakpoints would signal the number of units that would get the discount. Sort of a, if I buy 5 units, I can get 10% off the total price kind of thing. I don't plan to use this, I just wanted to show you. And related to this, we have the price reduced per breakpoint field. Here you can enter a value that will be applied as a discount at each breakpoint. The number you enter needs to be a fraction of 1, with 1 being the equivalent of the total price per unit. So you set something like 0.1 or 0.2 in this field. But as I'm not using breakpoints in this example, adding a reduction won't have any effect on my element. So moving on. The next option we have is Enable Icon. It's disabled by default, but if we enabled it, then we'd get an icon above the title in the pricing list. But this is just an example icon. You can replace it with a different one that you'd source from the icon library, as it includes an extensive collection, or you can upload a custom SVG icon. That's up to you. For my design, I don't plan to use an icon, so I'll switch it off. Okay, there. After that, we can enable a separator. I'll switch it on so we can see what it looks like. There. The separator divides the title and price from the rest of the content in the price list part of the element. I'm going to keep it, and later we'll see the options we get for styling it. For now, we have the title option. We can use this field to replace the dummy title. That's this text here on the page. I'm going to change mine. Just a sec. Okay. And right under it, we have the description field where we can replace this text shown under the separator. I'm going to change this as well. Give me a moment. Here we go. I'm well on my way to having the content customized. The next thing we have is the currency option. It comes with a plain text input field, so you can type in whatever you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be a currency symbol. It can be a textual abbreviation just as easily. I'm going to leave this unchanged for my pricing slider. After that, we have the period field. It's another plain text input. I'm just going to replace the months with weeks. There. Then we have the button text field. I'll change this as well. One moment. As you can see, it's very straightforward. And the same goes for the button URL field. You simply enter the URL for whatever target page you want. As this is just a showcase, I'll set a hash symbol here to act as a placeholder. This will make the button look and act as if it's been linked. Under this, we have the info image field. We saw it at the very start when I removed the placeholder image, as I don't need an additional visual given my section background. So let's carry on. We've covered the first section of the options, and we can open the next one now, Info Separator. I'm not going to go into much depth when it comes to the separator option, since the separator is a bit like the button. It exists as a separate element called the divider in the Qi Addons collection. Therefore, a closer look into its options and their effects will be covered in a video specifically dedicated to that element. For now, in the layout option, I want the separator set to standard actually. Then for the position, which is actually something like the alignment, I'll set left. This is okay, we can't see the change now because the content is set to stretch full width. When I change that, we'll be able to see the change in the position. Okay. The section after this is for adjusting the separator if you chose the border image layout for it. When I open it, we can see it's empty. That's because my layout is standard, so there's nothing for me to do here. And the same goes for the section after this one. Info Separator icon. I didn't go for the layout with icon, so there are no options for me here. Given all that, I can move on to the Info Button section. As I mentioned earlier, both the separator and the button exist as widgets in their own right, and we won't be taking much time to explore the options for them as they're going to be thoroughly covered in separate videos. So for the button layout, I'm going to leave the setting on filled. Then the button type will stay standard. And the option to enable the button text underline can be switched to yes to add the line under the button text, but I don't need that for my design, so I'll move on. And finally, I'll leave the button size unchanged too. So this will more or less be the button shape, but I plan to change its style when we get to the button style options. Alright. The next section, Info Button Icon, allows us to add an icon to the button text. You can pick something from the icon library or upload an SVG, as I intend to do. And this is the icon I want. Insert media. And there it is now. If you add an icon, you can change the icon position. By default, it's on the right, but we can move it to the left. Given the icon shape I picked, I'm going to put mine on the right. Perfect. After this, we have the slider info section. But when I open it, it's empty. That's because the options that you get here apply to the pricing slider when it has the side layout. As I'm using the standard layout, I don't need these options. But I'll be making a second example of the pricing slider widget in this video, and we'll cover these options then. Okay, the next section is Developer Tools. It contains an option you get with all of our widgets. If you switch it to yes, then it will display the widget in the form of a WordPress shortcode. That's this light gray text you see here, and you can easily copy that shortcode for use elsewhere on your site. Alright, I'll switch this back. And finally, we have the Help section. It contains links to various helpful resources in case you need them. And that's all for the Content tab. Let's take a look at the Style tab now. The first thing here is Info Style, or the options to adjust the look of the price list part of the element. And here we can adjust the info width. Let me show you. I'll set 300 pixels. And we can see the price list part has become significantly narrower. The slider above it will stay the same because we have separate options for adjusting it. Still, for the info width, I actually want to set 415 pixels. Whoops, okay, there we go. After that, we have the alignment. By default, it's in the center, but you can move it to the right or the left. I'm going to leave mine on the left. If you recall, I also aligned my separator to be on the left, and now they'll match. Next, there's the info background color. It has this easy-to-use color picker, so you can set whatever color you like by dragging the slider, like so. Or you can input a hex code. I'm going to set regular white, it's all the way in the corner, or marked by 6 Fs if you want to use the hex code. Following that, we have the info border color. If you choose a new color here, then it will appear as the price list border. You can see it here framing the window. And to go with the color, we also have the info border width option where we can change how thick the border will be. The more you increase the value here, the thicker the border becomes. So that's one possibility with the width. The other is to click here to disconnect the 4 fields, and then you can enter a different value in each. Or change just one side, like this, while leaving the others blank. There are different design possibilities. Still, neither of these are part of my plan design, so I'll remove this. And the color too. Okay. That was the info style. Next, we have the slider style section for adjusting the look of the slider part of the element. At the very top of this section, we have 2 switches that, once selected, will reveal differing options. At the moment, we're looking at the options under normal, meaning they will affect the look of the slider when it's displayed normally as opposed to being hovered over or actively used. And the first option here is line background color. If I select something, we can see the new line color appear right away. I have a specific shade of green in mind for this, so I'll enter the hex code for it. Okay, there. And the option next to this is line height, in case we want to make the slider line thicker. I'm going to set 18 pixels for mine. Alright, those were the normal options. Let's look at the ones under active. Here we have the line active background color. I'll set something different here. But to show you the change, I need to open the live page preview, so I'll update. And I have a tab with a preview already open, so refresh. Okay, here we are. Now when I click on the slider and move it, we can see the active colors start to appear. So if you want to differentiate between the active and inactive parts of the slider, then this is a useful option for you. However, that's not part of my plan design, so I'll clear the setting here. Okay, the line height we already covered, so after this we have the drag color option. With it, we can change the color of the handle used in the slider, like so. I want the color that will match the slider line, so I'll set a darker shade of green here. Perfect. Then we have the drag width, an option that allows us to change the width of the slider handle. I'm going to set 32 pixels for this. And right after, we have the drag height. I plan to set the same value here as I did for the width to get a symmetrical slider handle. But if you want, you can set something different, say 50 pixels, and get an elongated slider handle. It's all down to the design you want to make. For myself, I'll set 32 pixels again. Okay. Next, we have the drag top position option. It allows us to set the horizontal position of the slider handle. I'm going to center mine by giving it a negative value. Just a sec. There. Now the handle is right in the middle of the slider line. Then we have the drag border color. We can pick out a color here, and then the slider handle will have this sort of frame. And to go with it, there's the drag border size option for making the line around the handle thicker. It won't affect the size, the border color will just push inwards. Under that, we have the drag border radius option. Whether you're using a border or not, this option will work on the slider handle. There is a default value already set for it, and that's what's responsible for the circular shape of the handle. If you set something new here, for example, I'll put 4 pixels, then the circle will revert to a square with only slightly rounded corners. You can set 0 for the radius to get a regular square, or simply remove whatever you added, like I'm doing, to restore the default radius value and get the circular look back. I'll restore the border settings as well. Just a sec. Okay. After that, we have an option for changing the drag arrow's color. If I set something new, you can see the icon immediately changes. I'll reset this as I want to keep the default white. It fits with my color palette. Then we have the slider bottom margin option. It serves to create more space between the slider and the price list under it. You can see how the gap between them changes when I move the slider. So you can set how far apart these two components will be. I'm going to set 65 pixels of space for mine. Okay, now we can open the next section, Info Title Style. The options here will help us style the title text within the price list. And the first option here is title padding. With it, we can adjust the space around the title. And you can set all sides to have the same amount of padding, so you get something like this. Or you can make them distinct, which is what I want to do. I'll clear this and then click here to disconnect the fields. Now I can enter a different value for each side. And that's going to be 35 pixels at the top, 0 on the right, 35 at the bottom, and 52 on the left. And don't worry, I'll be styling the title itself as well, so this will look much better shortly. Alright, the next option is title tag. We can pick any of the settings in this drop-down to change the HTML tag for the title. I'm fine leaving mine set to the default H6. After this, we have the Info Title Background Color option. We can use it to set the background color for the space that holds the title. I'm going to make mine an almost black shade. Give me a moment to type in the hex code. Okay, and right after that, I'm going to change the info title color to make the title text visible again. You can use the slider for that, or set a specific shade using the hex code input field, as I plan to do. I'm going to set plain white here. There we go. And finally, we have the info title typography, which represents a collection of several options. Those options include the font family. There are hundreds of fonts for you to choose from. Then there's the font size, which can make the title bigger or smaller. I'll set 21 pixels here. Next, the font weight allows us to make the title lighter or bolder, whichever we prefer. I'm going to increase the weight a touch by picking 600 semi-bold for my design. Okay. After that, there's the option to transform the title text to uppercase, lowercase, make it capitalized, or leave it normal. Then the style option will let us turn the title from normal to italic or oblique. And with the decoration option, we can add a line under, over, or through the title if that works with our design. Under that, we have 3 options for adjusting different aspects of typography spacing. Those are the line height, letter spacing, and word spacing options. And that's everything we get under typography. Also everything we get in the Info Title Style section. The next one we have is Info Price Style. These options are for styling the price listing itself, this bit of text here. Here we can adjust the price holder padding. As we can see, this padding is applied around the price, the currency, and the time period as a unit. And if you don't want the same padding all around, you know the drill. Let me clear this. Just click here to disconnect the fields. I only want to change the left side padding, so I'll set 52 pixels here. Okay. Under that, we have the Info Price Holder Background Color. A lengthy name, but it simply refers to the space that holds the information on the price, currency, and period, and our ability to change its color, like so. You can see it encompasses this whole row, let's call it. Next, we have the info price color. With that, we can change the color only for the digits that make up the price, as you can see. For this, I'll set the same color as the one I used for the title background. There. Underneath, we have another bundle of typography options, and they affect the price digits only. Since we've already covered the options that are included under typography, I'll simply make the changes I need for my design and we'll carry on. So I'll make the price a bit bigger by setting 70 pixels, and I'll increase its width by setting 500 median. That's all I needed here. Let me close this. The next few options concern the currency. We can change its color. You can see it here. I'll set the same shade as the price color. Okay. And in the typography settings for the currency, I'll set the size to 40 pixels and the weight to 500 median. The rest can stay as is. Then we have the options for styling the time period text. There's the color. It works the same as all the others we've seen so far. And just like them, I'll make this the same almost black shade. And under that, we have the period typography. I don't plan on changing anything here. But if we open it, we can see it has all the same options we've had so far. So you know what to expect. Alright. Under that, we have the info currency margin. If I start to increase, it will create more space around the currency. In my case, the $sign. And we can see the changes to the space around it. This option also comes with a button to delink the field, so you can enter different values for different sides. But I don't plan on making changes to the default values, so I'll simply clear this. And the last option in this section is the info period margin. Only two fields are active for that, bottom and left. You can change the value here and push the period text upwards and sideways if you like. I want to make a tiny adjustment here, so I'll clear this and delink the fields. Then I'll set 4 pixels for the bottom to align the period with the price. There, it's much neater now. The next section we have is info description style. These options apply to the descriptive text under the price. And the first thing we can do for it is to change its padding. When I start to increase the value here, you can see how the space has changed all around the description text. Still, this is too much room for my design, so let me fine-tune this. Just a sec. I want 7 pixels at the bottom and 52 on the left. And that's all. My text and price are aligned now. The option after this is for changing the color of the description text. It has this familiar color picker, which I'll use to set that almost black shade I've been setting elsewhere. Okay. Next, we have the info description typography. It's composed of the same options we've been seeing elsewhere. I only want to change one thing here, the line height. It's going to be in pixels and I'm going to set 28. That's all. I'll close this. And that's it for styling the text content. The following 2 sections are there to help us style the separator. Let's open the first one. The first option here is the color. You can set anything you like and change the separator line. But for my part, I'll keep the color matching with the rest of the content. Okay. After that, we have the border style option. We can use it to change the type of line used as the separator. The default setting is the same as solid. When I change it, nothing happens. Before I show you the other 2 possibilities, let me increase the line thickness. It will help us see the differences more clearly. Now, other than solid, we also have a dashed line, which looks like this, or dotted, which looks like this. For my design, I'll go back to using the default, and I'll remove the change to the line thickness. And between these 2, we have the width option. This lets us adjust how wide, or in effect long, the separator line will be. Rather than a line as wide as my content, I want a separator that will be more of a notch, so I'll set 33 pixels here. Perfect. Now we can also see the separator alignment. I set it to the left, but we couldn't see that when the line took up all the available width. We looked at the thickness option already, so I'll just increase it a bit and we can carry on. Alright, after this we have the margin top option. It's for modifying how much space you'll have above the separator. You can increase it, like so, but I'll set 0 here to remove any extra space because I plan on making adjustments using the padding option below. And to go with this, we have the margin bottom option for modifying the space under the separator. So you can get something like this. For my design, I'll set 21 pixels here. And as I mentioned, we also have the separator padding option here. You can adjust all sides evenly, or you can set each side separately, which is what I'll do. So it's going to be 18 pixels at the top, 0 on the right, 8 at the bottom, and 50 on the left. It's all shaping up. The section after this one is Info Separator Icon Style. I don't have any options here. That's because they apply only to the separator layout called With Icon, which is not the one I'm using. So let's carry on. After this, we have the Info Button Style section. With the options here, we can adjust the look of the button at the bottom of the price list. This one. And the first thing we can do for it is to adjust its typography settings. This, of course, applies to the text within the button. And the options you get here are part of the standard typography bundle, so there's no need to go over them again. Then we have a set of switches. Looking at the options under Normal, there's Text Color. It has this familiar color picker, so it's easy to set whatever color you like. For my design, I'll set plain white. And to keep the text visible, I'll change the background color too. You can pick something using the slider or add a specific color by typing in its hex code. I want to make my button the same color as the little handle on the slider, so I'll set the hex code to get it. There. Then we can add a border to the button. To do that, first pick a color, and then give it a width so it shows. As I don't want to use a border, I'll remove these settings. Okay, so those were the options under Normal. Let's see what we have under Hover. It's pretty similar actually. There's Text Hover Color, so the button text can show a different color on hover. But I want to keep the default white, so I'll reset this. Then we have the Background Hover Color. The color you set will show only when you hover over the button. Although it's not part of my planned design, I'll keep this for just a bit so I can show you the Reveal Background option. That's this. By default, it's set to none. So there's no particular transition between the normal and hover button background colors. However, we can add one. There's horizontal, and it creates this effect. And there's vertical, which results in this look. I want my button to remain unchanged on hover, so I'll return the setting here to none. And I'll clear the hover background color. But before that, we have the border hover color. So we can set a border that would appear only on hover, or have a border that changes colors on hover. It has this familiar color picker, so you can easily choose your color. Okay, let me reset this. There, and the button, it's just as I wanted it to be. Let's carry on with the rest of the options. We looked at border width, and the next one is border radius. Despite its name, this option will work on the button even if you don't set a border. So, if I start to increase, we can see the button's corners start to round out. If you keep increasing, the button will be more oval. But I want a regular rectangle, so I'll set 0 here to remove any default radius values. Okay, after that, we have the padding option. It lets us adjust the space around the button text and indirectly change the button dimensions. You can see that if I start to increase, the button reflects the changes to the space. I want to adjust each side separately for this, so I'll disconnect the fields and then I can enter 13 pixels for the top, 43 for the right, 13 for the bottom, and 43 again for the left. Okay, my button is a bit more compact now. After that, we have the button holder padding. This option serves to adjust the space that contains or holds the button itself. Let me show you. When I start to change it, you can see how the space around the button adjusts. I want to adjust only the left side here, so give me a second, and I'll put 50 pixels for it. There. Now the button is in line with the rest of the content in the price list, which is exactly what I wanted. Following this, we have the Info Button Icon Style section. The options here will help us style the icon that's displayed next to the button text. To start with, we can change its size. You can use the slider or type in a value. It's all the same. Then we have the two switches to differentiate the options used for the normal and the hover display. Under normal, we can change the icon color. You can set anything you like and it will only affect the icon. I'll reset this to keep the default shade. And in the hover settings, we have the move icon option. It's responsible for creating the animated movement effect the icon has on hover. The default setting for horizontal short looks like this. Of the other available settings, we have horizontal, which looks like this. Then there's vertical, which looks like this. Diagonal, that gets us this look. And none, which is a setting that disables the animated effect, so there's no movement on hover. For my design, I'll go back to using the horizontal short setting. After that, we have the icon margin option. It, as you can see, works to change the space solely around the icon. I want to set differing values here, so I'll clear this, delink the fields, and enter -1 for the top, leave the right and bottom side set to 0, and put 5 pixels on the left. There, that looks nice. Now, the next two sections are blank for me. You can see there are no options here when I open them. That's because they apply to the button type with inner border or a button that has a text underline enabled, neither of which I'm using in this example. But if you enable either of the two, then you'll find options here. So I can move on to the info spacing style section where I have options that I can adjust. The first one is holder padding. This option allows us to adjust the space around the entirety of the content in the price list portion of the element. So if I increase, you can see the space change all around. For this, I'm only going to set some padding at the bottom. So disconnect the fields and enter 58 pixels for the bottom. Okay. Next, we have the info title margin bottom option. It's for adjusting the space under the title in the price list. You can see I've created a lot more space here. I'm going to increase it a touch more, so I'll have 43 pixels for my margin. Okay. Then the price wrapper margin bottom allows us to adjust the space under the price list's contents, but before the button. That's this cap here. I'm good with the default setting, so I'll clear this. And under that, we have another option with a similar effect, the info button margin top. By changing the value here, we can change the amount of space above the button, this here. Again, I'm good with keeping the default setting, so I'll clear this. Alright. Let's look at the next section. It's the slider delimiter style. The options here will let us style the lines that mark the unit breakpoints if you decided to use them. As I didn't, I'll skip these for now and we'll circle back when I've finished creating both my pricing slider examples. So next, we have the slider value style. These options are for styling the text that's attached to the slider handle. So for starters, we can change the slider value color. You can see here what the change might look like. I'm going to set white for this to make it more visible. Okay, then we have the slider value typography. The options here should be familiar by now, so I'll just change what I need and we can move on. That's going to be the size, 17 pixels. Alright. And under that, we have the slider top margin option for adjusting the space between the text and the slider handle it follows. I'm going to draw them a bit closer by setting 12 pixels here. There we go. That's the end of the slider value style section. Under it, we have 3 more sections with varied options, but they will be easier to show using the second example, so we'll cover them a bit later. For now, my first example is done, and I can save my work by pressing update. And then we can tackle the second example. Oh dear, I see now I should have added a bit of padding to the right of the description text. It's far too close to the edge as it is, and it doesn't look nice. So I need to reopen the info description style section and add 9 pixels for the right side padding. Perfect. Update again, just in case. Now, with the padding I added, my first pricing slider looks very neat. And since it's done, I can check on it using the live page preview I have opened in a different tab. Refresh. And here we are. The whole section looks good. Let me try the slider as well. Yes, it's moving and calculating as it should. Let's return to the backend and start in on our second example. So I'll click here to open the widget selection and search for the pricing slider. There it is. Drag it over to the right. And again, we have the default widget look. Now that you've seen me making the first example, it's clear what a difference some style options and replacing the content can make. And in this example, we'll create an entirely different look for the widget. And in doing so, we'll go over the options we skipped earlier. But enough talk, let's get started. For the layout, instead of simple, this time I'm going to use side. Then I'm going to hop down and replace the image. Just a sec. I have the one I want in my media library. Select and insert. Okay, here it is now. And the change in size has made the pricing slider easier to take in. So I'll go back up and start customizing the contents. This will be quick since we've covered what the options are already, and I'll just be changing what I need for the new design. So unit name, hour, and the plural form, hours. Then for units range, I'll set 100. Next, the price per unit will be 20. After that, I need to change the title. One moment. Okay. Then for the description, I'll reuse the one from my first example since it's just for our show and tell. So I need to select the element to get the appropriate options to open, and then navigate to the description field. There it is. And then simply select and copy the text. Now to add that text to my second pricing slider. Just a sec. Okay, there it is. Below that, the currency can stay, but I'll change the period by typing in the whole word instead of the abbreviation. I'll also modify the button text to make it shorter, and add a hashtag as a placeholder link. There. Next, I changed the image, so that's okay. But next to it, we have the slider position option. It's set to the left, so the slider portion of the element is displayed on the left, while the price list and the image are on the right. We can switch their places if we switch the setting here, and then we get something like this. I'll set my slider back on the left. Okay. And the horizontal align option allows us to move the image position within its holder space if we want to. The image I picked fits the element height-wise and its available space width-wise, so I don't need to make any changes here. So let's move on. I don't have a separator in this example, so I can skip those sections. And I don't have a separator icon either. So I need the info button next, as I plan to change the look of my button. To start with, I'll switch the layout to textual, and then the button will look like this. Also, my choice has reduced the number of options available to me, so I only have enable button text underline left here. I'll switch it to yes. And this underline will help me clearly distinguish the button from the rest of the text. And speaking of distinguishing the button, I want to add an icon to it. So, over in the next section, I'm going to choose to upload an SVG icon. This is the one I'll use. Insert media. There. And I'll switch its position to the left of the button text. Perfect. Now we have a section we hadn't explored previously, slider info. We can use the options here to add some more text content that would appear in this half of the element, placed above the slider. Let me show you. I'll add something to all three of these fields. Just give me a moment to type in my content. Okay, the subtitle and title are there. Now for the description, which will be a bit longer. One sec. There. We can see all the text I entered is here, even though it doesn't look all that great. But I plan to change its style and spacing settings, so don't worry, it's going to look much better by the end. So the next thing I need to do is open the Style tab. Again, I won't be explaining the options we've already examined, that would be a waste of your time. Instead, I'll simply make the changes I need for my design and show you the options we skipped while making the first example. So in this first section, I'll change the alignment to left. You can see it only affects the price list half of the element. There are separate options for the slider part and its accompanying text, and we'll cover them later. But while we're in this section, I want to set the background color to plain white. And I want to have a border, so I need to set a color for it to appear. Once you have a color, you can see that the price list has a thin border all around it. I want to set a light gray color here. Give me a sec to enter the hex code. Okay, if you like, you can use the info border width option to make the border wider, like so. However, I plan to keep the delicate look of my border, so I'll clear this. Moving on to the slider style section. I want to change the color of the slider line. That's this option. I'm going to add a hex code again. Just a sec. Okay. Then I'm going to change the line height to 25 pixels. And in the active settings, actually there's nothing I want to change here. Now to adjust the slider handle, in this example the handle will fit within the slider line, a bit like a toggle switch. You'll see what I mean in a second. I'll change the drag color to match the line color. Okay. Then I'll set the drag width to 55 pixels and the drag height to 25 pixels. Now I just need to make the handle fit the line, and I'll do that by changing the drag top position to 0. And now the handle looks like it's part of the line. To make it more distinct, I'll give it a border. You can set whatever color you like. I'll make my handle border black. Alright, then the drag border size option can be used to make the border wider, but I think that's too much given the color contrast. I'll reset this. In the drag border radius option, I'll set 0, and that will get me the rectangular handle I want for my design. Another thing I want to change is the drag arrows color. I'll set black so they match the border. And the bottom margin is fine, but I want to change the padding. And only for the right side, so disconnect the fields and enter 80 pixels. Perfect. Now I have a bit of space between the slider and the border of the price list half of the element. Moving on, the next section is info title style. So we're looking at making changes to this half now. To start with, I'll change the title padding. The new one will be 14 pixels at the top, 0 on the right, 29 at the bottom, and 0 on the left. Then I'm going to hop down to the typography so I can change the title size to 26 pixels and make the line height match that. So pixels instead of ems, and 26 is the value. Alright, let me close this. On to price style. From the options here, I'll need price color for my design. It's going to be a very dark gray, almost black. And in price typography, I'll set the size to 70 and the weight to 500 medium. Then for currency color, I'll set the same hex code I used for the price color. Okay, and I'll change its size and weight too. Size will be 40 and weight 500. That's it. Next, the period style. Again, I'll use the same color, so all three match. I won't be making any changes to the typography for the period. And I don't need a currency margin, but I will take advantage of the period margin to set 4 pixels at the bottom and get it to align more nicely with the price. Okay, now for the description style section. Here I want to change the padding. Give me a moment to set what I need for my design. There. Then for the description color, I'll set the same almost black I've used for the price. Finally, in the typography settings, I want to increase the line height. So I'll switch to pixels and set 28 for the value. There, done. I'm going to skip the next two sections as they are for styling the separator, which I don't have in this example. So the section I need next is info button style. In the typography settings for the button, I'll increase its text size to 17 pixels. And in the text color, I'll use the same hex code I used for the description and price. Then in the hover settings, no, I don't need anything else here. So let me hop down to the button icon section. I need the margin option here to adjust the positioning of my icon. Just a moment. There, perfect. I'll skip the section for the button with inner border as that's not the type of button I've chosen to use. Instead, I have the button with an underline and this section with options that will help me style it. We haven't covered these options before, so let's see what we have in here. For starters, under normal settings, we have the underline color. It has this familiar color picker, so setting a new color will be easy. I'll clear this to get the default color back. Then the underline width option helps us shorten the line if we want to. Let me set something. There. And with a shorter line, we can change the underline alignment. It's set to the left by default, but we can move it to the right or place it in the center. I'll restore the setting to left. Over in the hover settings, we have the underline hover color option. I'll set something so we can see it. And I'll adjust the underline hover width while I'm here, so the line doesn't run away from me when I hover over it. And now when we look, the line on hover has both a new color and a new width. We have one more option in the hover settings. It's the enable hover underline rule. If we switch it to yes, it will add a special animated effect that makes the line vanish and be drawn again on hover. There, see? I'm going to restore all these settings to the default as my design doesn't involve changing them. Just give me a minute while I go through everything I modified. And over in the normal settings. Okay, perfect. Now let's see what options we haven't covered. There's underline offset, which can be used to move the underline closer to or further away from the button text. I'm going to bring my underline closer by setting 7 for this. Alright. And under that we have the underline thickness option in case we want to make the line bolder, like so. I'll stick with the default for this. Okay. That's it for the button underline style. Let's move on to info spacing style. We've covered these already, so I'll be swift. I need the content or holder padding first. It'll have different values, namely 75 pixels for the top, 0 for the right, 90 for the bottom, and 55 for the left side padding. And this is what I have now, a neater and more centered look. There is only one more thing I need to adjust in this section, the button margin top. I'll bring the button a touch closer to the description by putting 22 pixels here. Okay, that's it. I've reduced the space by a bit. That brings us to the next section, which is slider delimiter style. I don't have delimiters or breakpoints as part of my design in either of the two examples I've made, so we'll keep these for the very end. Once I've covered all the relevant options, we'll take a look at what we have here. For now, let's open the slider value style section. We covered these options already, so I'll straight out make the changes I need and we'll carry on. And what I need here is to change the font size. So, typography, size, 17 pixels. And weight, 500 medium. That's all. And we have the slider top margin if we want to move the text away from the slider itself. I think the default look is fine, so I'll clear this. Okay. Next, we have a section with entirely new options. The slider subtitle style will help us style the subtitle text I added for this example. That's this here. To start with, we can change its HTML tag. You can choose anything from H1 to H6 or even the P tag. Then we have the subtitle color option for changing the color of this text if we want to. Alongside those, there are the typography settings for the subtitle. We already know what options are included here, so I'll just use the one I need, which is the size. It's going to be 17 pixels. Okay. Under that, we have the subtitle bottom margin option. Whoops. As you can see, with this option, we can adjust the space under the subtitle. I am going to set -14 pixels for the value. Now there's a smaller gap between the subtitle and the title. Speaking of the title, the next section is going to help me style it. The options are pretty similar to those we saw for the subtitle. So there's the option to change the title's HTML tag. We can pick anything from this dropdown. Then there's the color option, pretty standard as you've seen by now. And we also get the typography settings for the title. Here I'll change the size to 50 and the weight to 500 medium. Okay. And after that, we have the slider title bottom margin option for adjusting the space under the title, this here. I'll set 12 pixels for mine to reduce it a bit, and that's it for the slider title style section. Moving on to the slider description style, we have a similar set of options. So the color is here again. As you can see, we can easily change the description color to any shade we like. Next to that, we have the typography settings. I need just two of the options here. The font size, 20 pixels, and the line height is also going to be in pixels. Let me change it. I'll put 29 for mine. There. Under the typography, we have the description padding option. We can increase all sides evenly to get more space around the description text. But I only need to adjust specific sides, so I'll click here and enter my values. which are going to be 140 pixels on the right. Actually, this can do with even more space. I'll set 200. And then I'll put 50 pixels for the bottom side. And the other two will stay at 0. I'm happy with this look. In fact, I pretty much completed my design. But before we finish up, I promised to show you the delimiter style options. And to do that, I need to go to the Content tab and set my unit breakpoints. I'll put, for example, 5. And now we can faintly see the lines, delimiters or breakpoints if you will, along the slider. It is these lines that we'll be able to style with the slider delimiter style options. Let me just find and open them. Here they are. The first option we have here is for changing the breakpoint line's color. I'll set something random. There. And then we have the delimiter width for making the lines thicker. I'll set, for example, 3 pixels. Okay. And finally, we have the delimiter height for, you guessed it, adjusting the height of the breakpoint lines. I'll set 70 for that. And now the slider has clearly marked breakpoints to indicate amounts as well as quantities where a discount might be applied. That's all I wanted to show you here. I'll remove the changes I just made as breakpoints are not part of my planned design. Just a moment while I get them all, and disable the breakpoints too. There we go. This is the look I wanted for my second pricing slider example. And since I'm done, I'll hit update to save my work. So, during the course of this video, I created 2 completely different examples of the pricing slider widget. The resulting looks are completely dissimilar, but the foundation is the same. And if you want to see a few more examples of the design you can make with this widget, you can check out the page we started from. Here you'll find a couple of different looks that should give you an idea of what's possible and maybe even inspire the direction you'll go in. You'll also find the examples I created here, which you now know how to break down and recreate if that's something you want to do for your site. The important thing is that you've seen all the options as well as how they're used, what input they take, and the effect various combinations of those options can create. It's now up to you to decide which direction you want to take for your site. Ultimately, we hope you found this video helpful and that you'll give the widget a try. In case you have any questions, if there's something we haven't covered that you'd like explained, or if you simply have a comment or suggestion you'd like to make, please drop us a line in the comment section below. Also, make sure to subscribe and be the first to learn about any new tutorials on our channel. Thank you for watching.